Marcus Jones drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his mind still on the long day of meetings at City Hall. As he approached the intersection, red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror. His heart sank. He hadn't been speeding or breaking any laws. With a resigned sigh, Marcus carefully pulled over to the side of the road, gravel crunching beneath his tires. As we reflect on this real-life story, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that need to be heard. Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. As a respected black judge, Marcus had hoped society had moved past judging people solely on their skin color. Yet as he watched the officer approach in his side mirror, hand resting near his holster, a familiar knot of dread formed in Marcus's stomach. Neither man could have anticipated how this seemingly routine traffic stop would unfold, or the far-reaching consequences it would have for the justice system they both served. Marcus Jones eased his sedan onto the quiet suburban street, the day's weight lifting from his shoulders as he drove. His mind drifted towards the comfort of home, a welcome respite from the courtroom's demands. The steady hum of the engine and rhythmic passing of streetlights lulled Marcus into a sense of calm. Suddenly, a flash of blue and red lights shattered the tranquil scene. Marcus's heart rate spiked as he glanced in his rearview mirror, a familiar sense of unease settling in his stomach. He hadn't been speeding, his registration was up to date, and he was certain he hadn't run any red lights. As he signaled and pulled over, his mind raced through potential reasons for the stop. Marcus took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. He was no stranger to situations like these, having faced similar encounters in his younger years. But now the stakes felt different. He was acutely aware of the delicate balance between his professional status and the realities of being a black man in America. As he waited for the officer to approach, Marcus carefully considered his next moves. He knew the importance of remaining calm and composed, regardless of the circumstances. His years on the bench had taught him the value of patience and clear communication, skills he hoped would serve him well in this unexpected encounter. The crunch of gravel under heavy boots signaled the officer's approach. Marcus watched in his side mirror as the figure drew nearer, the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the back of his car. He noticed the officer's hand resting on his holster, a detail that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Tension mounted as the officer reached the driver's side window. Marcus kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his posture straight. He turned his head slowly, meeting the officer's gaze with a mixture of caution and quiet confidence. The streetlight overhead cast half of the officer's face in shadow, making it difficult for Marcus to read his expression. As the officer's eyes narrowed, taking in Marcus's appearance and the interior of the vehicle, Marcus prepared himself for whatever might come next. He knew that the next few moments could unfold in countless ways, each with its own set of potential consequences. The weight of his position, his responsibilities to his community, and his personal experiences all converged in this single, tense moment. With the window lowered, the sounds of the night filtered in, crickets chirping, a distant dog barking, and the low idle of both vehicles. As the officer opened his mouth to speak, Marcus braced himself, ready to navigate whatever course this encounter might take. Officer Mike Brennan's face appeared in the window frame, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his cap. The glint in his gaze made Marcus's pulse quicken. Brennan's flashlight beam swept across the car's interior, lingering on Marcus's tailored suit and the leather briefcase on the passenger seat. The officer's posture remained tense, his free hand resting near his holster. "License and registration," Brennan barked, his tone unnecessarily sharp. Marcus maintained his composure, reaching slowly for his wallet and glove compartment. "Of course, officer," Marcus replied, his voice steady and respectful. He handed over the requested documents, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. As Brennan examined the papers, Marcus watched the officer's face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition or change in demeanor. The seconds ticked by, and Marcus found himself grappling with a familiar internal struggle. He knew his rights and understood the law better than most, yet the instinct for self-preservation urged caution. The weight of his judicial robes seemed far away in this moment, replaced by the vulnerability of his skin color. Brennan's eyes narrowed as he looked from the license back to Marcus. Where are you coming from at this hour, sir? The question carried an accusatory edge, as if Marcus's mere presence on the street was cause for suspicion. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain calm. I'm on my way home from work, officer. It was a long day at the courthouse. And what exactly do you do at the courthouse? Brennan pressed, his tone dripping with skepticism. The injustice of the situation burned in Marcus's chest, but he kept his voice level. I'm a judge, officer. I was presiding over cases until late this evening. Brennan's eyebrows raised slightly, but instead of backpedaling, he doubled down. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, sir. As Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, he found himself at a crossroads. Should he assert his rights and challenge the officer's unjust treatment? Or should he comply, prioritizing his safety in a situation that could easily escalate? The decision weighed heavily on him as he reached for the door handle, acutely aware that his next actions could have far-reaching consequences. Marcus stepped out of his car, the cool night air doing little to ease his unease. Officer Brennan's eyes bore into him, a mixture of suspicion and hostility evident in his gaze. What's in the trunk? Brennan demanded, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Marcus kept his voice steady. Nothing of concern, officer. Just work files in my gym bag. Brennan's eyes narrowed. I'm going to need to take a look. Pop the trunk. Marcus felt a flicker of indignation. He knew his rights and understood that the officer had no probable cause for a search. The weight of the moment pressed down on him as he considered his options. Officer, Marcus began, his tone respectful but firm. I don't consent to a search of my vehicle. May I ask why I was pulled over? Brennan's jaw tightened, his hand inching closer to his holster. Listen here, he growled, taking a step forward. I don't care who you think you are. When I give an order, you follow it. Now open the trunk before I have to make you. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Marcus's heart raced, a mix of frustration and fear coursing through him. He thought of the countless cases he'd presided over and the importance of upholding the law. Yet here he stood, his own rights trampled by the very system he served. Officer Brennan moved closer, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Marcus. Last chance, he warned, his voice low. Open the trunk, or I'll have grounds to arrest you for obstruction. Marcus knew Brennan was overstepping, that his threats were baseless, but knowledge offered little protection against a hostile officer with a weapon. The injustice of it all burned in his chest. With a resigned sigh, Marcus reached for his keys. As he moved to comply, he reflected on the countless others who had faced similar situations, those without his legal knowledge or societal standing. The trunk latch clicked open, and Brennan roughly pushed past Marcus to begin his search. Marcus stood silently, his fists clenched at his sides. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, the routine traffic stop having morphed into a stark reminder of the prejudices that still plague society. As Brennan slammed the trunk shut, finding nothing of interest, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. Should he reveal his identity now, asserting his authority as a judge? Or should he endure this humiliation, gathering evidence of Brennan's misconduct for later action? The decision weighed heavily on Marcus as Officer Brennan strode back towards him, a look of frustrated disappointment on his face. Whatever choice he made in the next few moments would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but potentially for the broader issues of racial profiling and police accountability. Marcus felt the weight of his judicial robes, though he wasn't wearing them. The cool metal of his badge pressed against his chest, hidden beneath his shirt. As Officer Brennan approached, Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing through potential outcomes. The internal conflict raged within him. His professional status offered little protection against ingrained prejudices. The urge to assert his rights battled fiercely with the instinct for self-preservation honed through years of similar encounters. Officer Brennan's impatience was palpable, his hand inching closer to his weapon. The tension in the air crackled, a stark reminder of how quickly these situations could escalate. Marcus knew he had to choose his words carefully. Officer, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. I understand you're doing your job. Perhaps we can discuss this calmly. He kept his hands visible, his movements slow and deliberate. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, not just for his own safety, but for countless others who had faced similar situations. Marcus was acutely aware of the unique challenges he faced. The very achievements that had earned him respect in the courtroom seemed to dissolve in the face of preconceived notions. He had to navigate a treacherous path, balancing the assertion of his rights with the need to diffuse a potentially volatile situation. His carefully chosen words hung in the air, their impact yet unknown. Marcus watched Officer Brennan's face, searching for any sign that his attempt at de-escalation was working. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, each moment pregnant with possibility and danger. Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the countless times he had presided over cases involving police misconduct. The irony of his current situation was not lost on him. He had always strived to be impartial, to see beyond the surface and render fair judgments. Now he found himself on the other side, subject to the very biases he had worked so hard to eliminate from his courtroom. The decision to reveal his identity loomed large in Marcus's mind. Would it make a difference? Or would it only serve to further aggravate the officer whose frustration seemed to be growing by the moment? Marcus weighed his options, knowing that his next words could dramatically alter the course of this encounter. Despite the injustice of the situation, Marcus maintained his composure. He drew upon his well of self-control, his exterior betraying none of the turmoil that raged within. His voice remained steady, his posture relaxed, yet dignified. As Officer Brennan's patience visibly wore thin, Marcus realized the moment of revelation was upon him. He took a final deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. With a mix of trepidation and resolve, Marcus prepared to unveil his true identity, knowing that the next few moments would be pivotal in shaping the outcome of this fraught encounter. Marcus took a deep breath, and his decision was made. With a calm but authoritative voice, he addressed Officer Brennan. "Officer, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I am Judge Marcus Jones of the Superior Court." Officer Brennan's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched across his face. "Yeah, right," he scoffed, his tone dripping with disbelief. Marcus felt a flicker of frustration, but he maintained his composure. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulling out his official courthouse ID. "I assure you, Officer Brennan, this is not a joke. Here's my identification." Brennan snatched the ID, his flashlight beam illuminating the official seal and Marcus's photograph. His brow furrowed as he scrutinized the credentials, looking back and forth between the ID and Marcus's face. This could be fake," Brennan muttered, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his wavering conviction. Marcus nodded patiently. "I understand your skepticism, officer. If you'd like, you can call the courthouse to verify my identity. I'm sure the night clerk would be happy to confirm who I am." As the reality of the situation began to sink in, Officer Brennan's demeanor shifted visibly. His shoulders slumped slightly, and the aggressive edge in his posture softened. The flashlight beam wavered, no longer trained directly on Marcus's face. I don't think that will be necessary, Your Honor," Brennan stammered, the formality slipping into his speech almost unconsciously. Marcus watched as the officer's face cycled through a range of emotions: disbelief, embarrassment, and finally a dawning horror as he realized the implications of his actions. "Officer Brennan," Marcus said gently, "I'd like to discuss what happened here tonight, but first, may I ask why you initially pulled me over?" Brennan's face flushed and he struggled to meet Marcus's gaze. Well, you see, there have been reports of suspicious activity in the area, and your vehicle matched a general description." His voice trailed off as the flimsiness of the excuse became apparent. Marcus nodded, not pressing further for the moment. He could see the internal struggle playing out on Brennan's face as the officer grappled with his actions and assumptions. The tension in the air shifted, transforming from hostility to a palpable discomfort. Officer Brennan fidgeted with his badge, his earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty. Marcus considered his next words carefully. The revelation of his identity had dramatically altered the power dynamics of their encounter, but he knew that how he handled the next few moments could have far-reaching consequences beyond this single interaction. "Officer Brennan," Marcus began, his tone measured and calm, I think we both know that what transpired here tonight was about more than just a routine traffic stop. I'd like to have an honest conversation about it if you're willing. Brennan swallowed hard, nodding slowly as the full weight of the situation settled upon him. As they stood there on the quiet suburban street, the air heavy with unspoken words and uncomfortable truths, it was clear that this encounter was far from over. The real challenge, and perhaps the opportunity for genuine understanding, was just beginning. Officer Brennan's posture changed dramatically, his earlier aggression melting away into uncertainty and embarrassment. The flashlight that had been aggressively pointed at Marcus now wavered, its beam dropping to the ground. Marcus observed this transformation, recognizing the shift in power dynamics. Stepping forward, Marcus spoke calmly but firmly. "Officer Brennan, I believe we need to discuss what transpired here tonight." He maintained steady eye contact. Brennan's eyes darted nervously, unable to meet Marcus's intense stare. "Your Honor, I apologize. I didn't realize—" His words trailed off, excuses dying on his lips. Marcus raised a hand, silencing the officer. "I understand you have a job to do, Officer Brennan. However, the manner in which you approached this situation was unacceptable." His tone balanced professional courtesy with unmistakable criticism. "Your aggressive demeanor, unfounded accusations, and disregard for my rights are deeply concerning. As a judge, I've seen firsthand the consequences of such behavior in our justice system." Brennan's face flushed red, a bead of sweat forming on his brow despite the cool night air. He visibly grappled with the gravity of his actions. "Officer," Marcus continued, his voice softening slightly, "I want you to understand the impact of your actions on every citizen you interact with. The badge you wear comes with immense responsibility." Brennan nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. "Yes, Your Honor, I never meant to—" He trailed off, at a loss for words. Marcus felt a mix of frustration and determination rise within him. This encounter presented an opportunity to address the systemic issues that plagued law enforcement and disproportionately affected communities of color. "Look at me, Officer Brennan," Marcus commanded, his voice firm, but not unkind. As Brennan raised his eyes, Marcus continued, "Consider how this situation might have unfolded if I wasn't a judge. How many others have faced similar treatment without the protection of a title?" The weight of the question hung in the air. Brennan's shoulders slumped as the full implications of his actions settled upon him. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing for his next move. He knew this moment had the potential to spark real change, not just for Officer Brennan, but potentially for the entire department. As he formulated his next words, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. As a judge and as a black man in a position of influence, the night air seemed to still be around them, as if the very environment was holding its breath in anticipation. Marcus squared his shoulders, ready to take control of the situation and turn this unfortunate encounter into a catalyst for meaningful dialogue and lasting change. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze fixed intently on Officer Brennan's face. The tension between them was palpable, but Marcus's voice remained steady and authoritative as he began to speak. "Officer Brennan, what transpired here tonight is a symptom of a much larger problem that plagues our justice system." Marcus paused, allowing his words to sink in. He could see the discomfort growing in Brennan's eyes, but he pressed on. "Every day, countless individuals face similar situations, but without the protection of a title or position. They are judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin." Marcus's tone was firm, yet tinged with a hint of sadness. He had seen this story play out too many times in his courtroom. Officer Brennan shifted his weight, his eyes darting nervously. The reality of his actions was beginning to dawn on him, and it was clearly an uncomfortable realization. Marcus continued, his words measured and clear. "Before you knew who I was, what assumptions did you make about me? About my character, my occupation, my likelihood of criminal behavior?" He paused, letting the questions hang in the air between them. Brennan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence stretched on, filled with unspoken truths and uncomfortable realizations. Marcus pressed on, his words gaining momentum. "Racial profiling erodes trust between law enforcement and the communities they're meant to serve. It creates fear, resentment, and a cycle of injustice that ripples through generations. As he spoke, Marcus recalled the words of attorney Ben Crump. It wasn't to deter crime. It was to send a message to Black people that we don't want your kind around here. The sentiment resonated deeply with Marcus, encapsulating the insidious nature of the problem they were discussing. Officer Brennan's discomfort was evident, his earlier confidence replaced by a growing look of shame. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on the officer's face as he grappled with the implications of his actions. The psychological impact of racial profiling extends far beyond individual encounters, Marcus explained, his voice softening slightly. It creates a pervasive sense of fear and mistrust among minority communities. Every traffic stop, every suspicious glance, every unwarranted search, they all contribute to a collective trauma that deepens the divide between law enforcement and the people they are sworn to protect. Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. He could see the wheels turning in Brennan's mind, the slow dawning of understanding in his eyes. This was the moment Marcus had been building towards, the opportunity to drive home the true impact of racial profiling. Officer Brennan, Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet intensity, racial profiling isn't just a violation of civil rights. It's a betrayal of the very principles of justice and equality that you and I have both sworn to uphold. It's a cancer in our system that we must excise if we ever hope to create true justice for all. As Marcus finished speaking, a heavy silence fell between them. The weight of his words hung in the air, challenging Officer Brennan to confront the reality of his actions and their far-reaching consequences. The next few moments would reveal whether this impromptu lesson had truly hit its mark, or if the deeply ingrained biases would prove too stubborn to overcome. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Officer Brennan's face contorted as he grappled with the collision between his ingrained beliefs and the undeniable truth before him. Marcus watched the internal struggle play out, recognizing the difficult process of confronting one's own biases. Officer Brennan, Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind, I want you to reflect on why you stopped me tonight. What assumptions did you make based solely on my appearance? Brennan's jaw clenched, his eyes darting up to meet Marcus's before quickly looking away. I was just doing my job, he muttered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. Marcus pressed on, his tone measured but unyielding. Your job is to protect and serve all citizens equally, yet your actions tonight suggest a different motivation. Can you honestly say that race played no part in your decision to pull me over? The question hung in the air between them, demanding an answer. Brennan struggled to find words that wouldn't further incriminate him. I understand this is not easy, Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. Recognizing our biases can be uncomfortable, but it's a crucial step towards personal growth and fostering a more equitable society. Brennan's shoulders slumped. I never thought of myself as racist, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But tonight, I can't deny that I made assumptions based on nothing but your skin color. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the officer's admission. That's a start, Officer Brennan. The next step is to actively work on changing those thought patterns. It's not enough to simply acknowledge bias. We must actively combat it. What happens now? Brennan asked, his voice uncertain. The question carried more weight than just the immediate aftermath of their encounter. Marcus straightened his posture, his expression serious. That depends on you, Officer Brennan. This encounter could be a turning point, an opportunity for growth and change. Or it could be swept under the rug, another incident in a long history of injustice. The tension in the air was palpable as Marcus prepared to address the potential consequences of the night's events. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. The conversation that had begun here on this quiet street had the potential to ripple far beyond this single encounter. Marcus's voice cut through the night air, his tone measured but firm. Officer Brennan, let's discuss how your actions tonight might factor into the larger issue of police accountability. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Officer Brennan's face paled, the gravity of the situation finally dawning on him. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Marcus observed the shift in the officer's demeanor, noting how quickly the power dynamics had changed. Your conduct opens up a range of legal possibilities, Marcus continued. Civil rights violations, abuse of power, unlawful detention. These are serious charges that could be brought against you and the department. Brennan's eyes widened, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. The reality of potential consequences was setting in, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on the officer's face. Marcus's gaze remained steady as he spoke. The psychological impact of racial profiling extends beyond this encounter. It erodes trust between law enforcement and minority communities, making accountability even more challenging. Brennan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run from the hard truths Marcus was laying bare. "So, Officer Brennan," Marcus said, his tone becoming more pointed, "you're facing potential civil lawsuits, disciplinary actions, and even criminal charges, depending on the outcome of any investigation into this incident." The tension in the air was palpable as Marcus let that information settle. Brennan's face had gone from pale to ashen, the full weight of his actions finally hitting home. "However," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a contemplative tone, "there's another path we could consider, one that focuses on education and reform rather than punishment alone." Brennan's eyes snapped up, a glimmer of hope mixed with confusion in his gaze. Marcus knew he stood at a crossroads, his decision in this moment potentially shaping not just Brennan's future, but the broader landscape of police-community relations. As the night air settled around them, Marcus weighed his options carefully. The path of strict punishment was clear, but would it lead to lasting change? Or could this moment be leveraged into something more transformative? Not just for Officer Brennan, but for the entire department? Marcus stood at the side of the road, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This traffic stop was more than an isolated incident. It represented a pervasive issue in law enforcement across the nation. He took a deep breath, his mind processing the implications of what had just occurred. The judge's gaze swept over the quiet suburban street, considering how many other black drivers had been unfairly targeted in this very neighborhood. Marcus felt the tension between his role as a judge and his personal experiences as a black man who had faced similar injustices. His analytical mind dissected the structural factors contributing to racial profiling. The lack of diversity in police departments, implicit biases affecting split-second decisions, and insufficient accountability for officer misconduct. Each element formed a piece of a complex puzzle perpetuating systemic inequalities. Marcus recalled various expert opinions on reforming police practices. Comprehensive training on implicit bias, community engagement initiatives, and robust accountability measures were crucial steps, but implementation remained inconsistent, and resistance to change persisted within many departments. The judge's frustration mounted as he considered those who faced similar situations without the protection of a title or position. How many lives had been irrevocably altered by such encounters? How many communities had lost faith in the institutions meant to protect them? Marcus contemplated potential solutions. Body cameras have shown promise in reducing incidents of racial profiling, while community oversight boards could provide civilian input on police conduct. However, he knew that true change would require a fundamental shift in police culture and training. As he faced Officer Brennan, Marcus realized this encounter presented a unique opportunity. He was positioned to effect change not just through his rulings from the bench, but through direct action and advocacy. Addressing this incident could potentially spark a broader conversation about reform. Marcus's resolve strengthened. Simply walking away with a stern warning to Officer Brennan wouldn't suffice. The systemic nature of the problem demanded a comprehensive response. As a judge, he had a platform and a responsibility to push for meaningful change. With determination, Marcus prepared to outline his plan to Officer Brennan. This moment would be about addressing the root causes of racial profiling and working towards a more just and equitable system of law enforcement. As he began to speak, Marcus felt the weight of history on his shoulders, but also the potential for real, lasting change. The tension between Marcus and Officer Brennan dissolved, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Marcus's mind raced with plans for reform, each one a potential catalyst for change. He knew that this encounter could lead to meaningful improvements in policing, but only if he acted decisively. Officer Brennan, Marcus began, his voice steady and authoritative, what happened here tonight is a symptom of a much larger problem in our justice system. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. I intend to address this issue head-on, using every tool at my disposal as a judge. Marcus outlined his approach, his words gaining momentum. He proposed training sessions for police officers on implicit bias and its impact on decision-making during traffic stops. These sessions would be mandatory, ensuring every officer confronted their own biases and learned strategies to overcome them. Officer Brennan listened intently, his earlier defensiveness giving way to reluctant curiosity. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on the officer's face as he grappled with the implications of this proposed change. Marcus continued, detailing his plans to advocate for policy changes, promoting transparency in police practices. We need to collect and analyze data on traffic stops to identify patterns of racial bias. Only by shining a light on these issues can we hope to address them effectively. As Marcus spoke, he sensed the weight of the challenge ahead. He knew implementing these changes wouldn't be easy. Resistance from law enforcement agencies, community skepticism, and the need for sustained funding were just a few of the obstacles he would face. Yet the potential for positive change drove him forward. Marcus explained his intention to collaborate with local organizations and community leaders. We need to ensure that these programs are culturally relevant and effectively address the needs of our community, he explained. This is about rebuilding trust between law enforcement and minority communities. Officer Brennan shifted uncomfortably, the full implications of Marcus's words settling upon him. The judge's plan was comprehensive, targeting not just individual behavior, but the very culture of policing itself. Marcus's voice grew more passionate as he concluded. By implementing these changes, we can work towards reducing racial profiling incidents and creating a more just system for all. He paused, his gaze locking with Officer Brennan's. But it starts here, tonight, with this encounter. You have a choice to be part of this change, Officer Brennan. The air between them crackled with possibility. Marcus could see the conflicting emotions playing across Officer Brennan's face. Fear, uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. The judge knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but he was prepared to face those challenges head-on. As Marcus prepared to leave the scene, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The night's events had taken an unexpected turn, transforming a routine traffic stop into a potential catalyst for systemic change. He knew that the real work was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a sense of genuine optimism about the future of justice in their community. The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders as he turned to head back to his car. This encounter reinforced his commitment to addressing systemic injustices, not just from the bench, but through active engagement with law enforcement and the community. Marcus knew that this night would mark a turning point in his career and his personal mission to create a more equitable justice system for all. Marcus Jones sat in his chambers, the weight of recent events pressing heavily upon his shoulders. The polished wood of his desk gleamed in the soft light, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface, tracing the grain as he reflected on the night's encounter with Officer Brennan. The traffic stop had forced Marcus to confront a harsh reality. His position as a judge offered no immunity from the biases entrenched in law enforcement. This realization sparked a profound shift in his perspective. He now saw his role not just as an interpreter of the law, but as a potential catalyst for change within the justice system. Marcus's gaze fell upon the framed oath of office hanging on his wall. The words seemed to take on new meaning, challenging him to bridge the gap between lofty ideals and the stark realities faced by many in his community. He contemplated the unique position he held, able to affect change from within, while also understanding the lived experiences of those who came before him. As Marcus reflected, a sense of renewed purpose began to take root. He envisioned implementing new training programs for officers, advocating for policy changes, and using his platform to raise awareness about the realities of racial profiling. The path ahead would be challenging, but Marcus felt a surge of determination. He stood, pacing the length of his chambers as his mind raced with possibilities. Marcus understood that his decisions from the bench could have far-reaching implications, shaping not just individual cases, but the very fabric of their community. He recognized the power he held to push for meaningful reform, to address the systemic issues that led to incidents like his encounter with Officer Brennan. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the windows of his chambers, Marcus felt a mix of trepidation and resolve. The weight of responsibility was immense, but so too was the potential for change. He knew that his actions in the coming days and weeks would set the tone for his future on the bench. Marcus turned to face the new day, his shoulders squared and his jaw set with determination. The traffic stop had been a stark reminder of the work that lay ahead, but it had also ignited a fire within him. As he prepared to don his robes and enter the courtroom, Marcus silently renewed his commitment to justice, not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible reality for all those who sought it. The gavel's echo faded, but the impact of Marcus's encounter reverberated far beyond the courthouse walls. His confrontation with Officer Brennan laid bare the insidious nature of racial profiling, exposing how deeply ingrained biases could cloud judgment, even in those sworn to uphold the law. The incident highlighted the stark reality that no amount of professional success or social standing could fully shield a person of color from unwarranted suspicion. Marcus's composure in the face of aggression, his strategic revelation of his identity, and his commitment to educating rather than merely punishing demonstrated a path forward. He showed that even in moments of personal injustice, there was an opportunity to plant seeds of change. The challenge of addressing racial bias in policing loomed large. Decades of ingrained practices and systemic inequalities couldn't be dismantled overnight. Marcus's encounter was a sobering reminder that progress, while possible, would require sustained effort and unwavering dedication. As Marcus had demonstrated, remaining calm and asserting one's rights during police encounters was crucial. Knowing and calmly stating one's rights could de-escalate tense situations and provide a foundation for accountability. His poise under pressure, strategic thinking, and commitment to education over retribution offered a template for turning confrontation into conversation. The potential for positive change hung in the air like electricity before a storm. If Marcus's experience could spark meaningful dialogue and action, it could contribute to a shift in how communities and law enforcement related to one another. Each interaction, each moment of understanding, could add to the momentum for change. As the final gavel fell on Marcus's story, a new chapter in the fight for justice was beginning. The lessons learned from his encounter would ripple outward, touching lives in ways yet unseen. The question now was how each person would contribute to shaping a more just and equitable future. Marcus Jones stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping across the packed auditorium. The events of that fateful night had set in motion a wave of change, rippling through their community and beyond. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Our individual actions, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, have the power to reshape entire systems. What happened to me became a catalyst for reform. He paused, letting his words sink in. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every word. Marcus could see the spark of determination in their eyes, mirroring his own. I challenge each of you to examine your own biases, he continued. We must actively work to address and overcome them. Only then can we hope to create a truly just society. Marcus's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. Become advocates for justice in your communities. Attend town halls, support police reform initiatives, engage in difficult conversations. As he concluded his speech, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but he knew that their collective efforts could make a difference in the pursuit of justice for all. Join our community of people who believe in justice, empathy, and powerful storytelling. By subscribing, you're not just watching, you're part of a movement that values real stories and change. Add us to your daily routine and make every story count. Subscribe and join us each day for stories that make an impact.